genesis of this panel. That's the genesis of the idea of the state of black sci-fi. So we have Alicia McCalla to thank, and I think we should give a round of applause. We are all local, well, at least until recently, local authors who are writing in the genre. We come at it from different directions. What I'm going to do now is introduce the panelists. And then we're going to kick off with a couple of questions and some things that we can be thinking about as part of this discussion. We're going to open it up. We're going to have a conversation here, and then we're going to open it up for questions and conversation from you guys in about 30 minutes or so. We'll see how it's going. Okay, so to my left. I'm going to tell you all a secret. I don't know my left from my right. But I always told myself that's because I'm a genius. You know, Albert Einstein couldn't tie his shoes. I don't know my left from my right.
This away and that away.
Well, I write with my right hand, so I should know. But I always, it's always a thing. To my left, I have Alan Jones. Alan is a native Atlantan, a former columnist for the Atlanta Tribune and the Wall Street consultant. He writes a brand of science fiction suitable for both adults and young adults. His brand of science fiction blends fanciful characters and scenarios with generous doses of philosophy and social commentary. His book, To Wrestle with Darkness, is available on Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, and at most major retailers. To his left, Milton Davis, no relation, is author, publisher of MV Media, LLC, a micro-publisher specializing in science fiction and fantasy. He is originally from Columbus, Georgia, has lived in the Atlanta metro area for the past 28 years. Milton specializes in sword and soul. His first book, Meiji Book 1, was released in 2008. He has since then released 4 more books, Meiji Book 2, Changa Safari Volume 2, and Griots, a sword and soul anthology. He is currently working on 2 additional novels, 2 anthologies, and a novel with Balagoon Ojitade titled Once Upon a Time in Africa. And finally, we have Alicia McCalla, and we may have another panelist joining us later this evening. And if she comes in, then I'll introduce her as well. Alicia McCalla is a native Detroiter who now lives in Metro Atlanta. She is a school librarian and an avid reader. She regularly writes and blogs about controversial issues that deal with race, sexism, culture, and classism. She writes fantasy for both young adults and adults with her unique brand of multicultural science fiction, urban fantasy, and futurism. The first book of her Genetic Revolution series, Breaking Free, is available in print or for immediate download on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, iTunes, and other booksellers. The other 2 books, Double Identity and The Revolution, will be available in 2013. And last but not least, I am Ellen Davis. I was born in Atlanta, raised in Chicago. I am the author of the Shifters novel series, of which currently there are 2 books available, Interlopers and Posers. I also write for a young adult audience, but I've had a lot of feedback from a lot of people across the spectrum who enjoy my books, which is great. So one of the things that we think about when we think about this idea of what is the state of black sci-fi, I guess there are a lot of questions that sort of come into play when we're thinking about what does that mean. For instance, what is black sci-fi, right? Mm-hmm. Before we can even talk about what the state is, we have to kind of figure out how we define it. So, for instance, some questions that we might be thinking about, are what constitutes what we would consider a black presence in science fiction? Is it enough to maybe have one character, say as Zoe Saldana, who was in Star Trek a couple of years ago, right? And we had, some other peripheral people of color. Is that enough? Is that a presence that we want to sort of claim and celebrate, or is that not enough? Is it, tokenism? Does black sci-fi have to reference or evoke some sort of black idioms? Do there have to be tropes that we understand to be connected to a particular kind of black experience in order for us to understand it as black sci-fi? Another way of thinking about that might be, is just because the characters are described as mocha colored, does it make it black sci-fi? Can somebody who is not black write black sci-fi? Lord, well, definitively, right? I mean, so these are all some questions that these are just the beginnings of some questions that we might ask ourselves about this topic. And then, once we think about those things, then also thinking about, how would we describe sort of Black participation in this genre? What are the benefits is too big of a word, but what are the possibilities, I guess, of Black participation in science fiction and fantasy writing, movie making, music making, just in the genre as a whole? So these are just some questions that we can start to think about and that our panelists can start to think about, and we can sort of move into them. But where I want to start us is with this question of, what do you think the state of Black sci-fi is? Since that's what our panel's called. I'm just going to tell you to jump right in.
Well, the state of Black science fiction is, I would say, is better than it has been from a couple of different standpoints. I think over the past couple of years, we've had a lot of significant change in the industry. A lot of significant Black writers have been awarded. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Nnedi Okorafor. She just wrote a book called Who Fears Death, which won the World Fantasy Award. She's a Black writer whose parents are from Nigeria. There's also N.K. Jemisin, who wrote 100,000 Kingdoms. That's a book that's also been nominated for Hugo and Nebula Awards. And then there's what's his name? Can't think of his name now. David Anthony Durham, who wrote the Acacia series, which is basically, some people consider it an equivalent to George R.R. Martin's book. And actually, George R.R. Martin came out and said some good things about it, and it won the John C. Campbell Award for the series. So when you're looking at it from a mainstream standpoint, there's a lot of things that have been happening as far as Black writers are concerned in science fiction. On the independent side, you have, and when I talk about independent, I'm talking about self-publishers and stuff like that. There's a lot of energy in the industry right now. There are a lot of writers like ourselves, who are basically writing stories that are, I want to say, more culture specific. Because when you look at science fiction, like somebody told me a long time ago, science fiction doesn't have a color. Science is science. But when you look at, to me, when you're looking at Black science fiction, you're looking at, I say that I'm a chemist, so science thing. Science is science, the theories apply. But when you look at what you call Black science fiction, it can go anywhere from being basically like a Star Trek character who is a person who just happens to be Black, or it can go all the way on the other end where you write a story that could not occur unless a Black person was in the story, because it's based on our experience and our history and things like that. So it's a wide range of things. But overall, I think it's improving. It's not where it needs to be, but it's getting better.
My name is Alicia McCalla, and Ellen Davis. I get street creds because I'm from Detroit.
Man, those streets ain't nothing like Andover.
I know, right? Greenfield, and Grand River. Anybody out there? I think I am very encouraged. I mean, Milton just gave a really great breakdown as far as mainstream. But for me, I see the most movement when you start talking about the independent publishers or people who are self-publishing. I mean, that industry now is changing so much, and it gives people the opportunity to share the stories the way in which they envision them. And so I'm excited because there are so many authors out there now where you have choice, and you get that depth, and you get that breadth. And I think that's very important in this genre. And so now when I look at Black speculative fiction, you don't just have one type. You have a range of people who are really sharing their message or their vision for the future, or in steampunk, or all kinds of areas, alternative history. These are things that have not ever been seen before. And because of the change in digital publishing, you're able to get this experience. And so I think that's very important. So I find, for me at least, within the next couple of years, we're going to see a huge shift or change in the availability of Black speculative fiction. That's
I'm Alan Jones. I want just to add on to that. what I kind of see the state of black science fiction is that, like I said, I do see a lot of movement, as Milton and Alicia were saying, in the independent publishing area, or because the barrier to entry to self-publish has drastically come down a lot in the last 10 to 15 years. The cost, the access to markets, a lot of the distributors are getting on board with independent sources. So that's been a good thing. On the other hand, as Alicia was saying, I think when it comes to the major publishing houses, not only are they still pretty much, at this point, still close to, quote, black science fiction, and to be honest, they're pretty much close to almost all new authors when it comes to what they consider to be black science fiction, black mystery, or whatever it might be. I was at a book conference a couple of years ago, and some fairly well-known authors were telling me that unless you were writing black erotica, they weren't even looking to sign you, And so basically, but that goes back to, you see that in movies, you see that in TV, you see that there's certain things that, quote, the suits look at, and they figure, they don't want to bet on something new. So all that to say is that I believe that, as Tyler Perry, and some others have gone out, and certain types of genre busters or whatnot come through, that when one of these independent black speculative, or not even independent, when a black speculative fiction book really starts knocking down the doors, then I think you'll see the major publishers get on board with it. But I think it's going to take us, selling X amount of copies, and then them wanting to get a piece of the pie at that point.
So this is actually just a survey of the audience, because we had a lot of conversation up here in these responses just about a lot of real energy being in the indie publishing. How many of you guys read indie publishing or seek out indie authors? Okay, good. Okay, cool. So that being said, when we're thinking about what black sci-fi looks like, and we can talk about, I brought up movies, a couple of movie references, and I'm thinking about other things like Blade. What do you think black sci-fi should look like? Is that a trick question? Is that am I throwing a gauntlet down here? Making you
Were you on Facebook with us the other day?
I'm never on Facebook. Oh, okay.
We had
a discussion about this.
Well, good. Then you've already been thinking about it. So what does black sci-fi look like?
Well, that's different. That's different.
Then what should it look like? Okay, well let's start first. Well, no, let's start with what should it look like. Should it be something that specifically references or explicitly references particular kinds of tropes, idioms that are part of African American experience? For instance, you're writing a book that's set 3,000 years in the future. Do you still have to sort of reference back to like the Middle Passage and slavery in order for it to be considered, or is there leeway to sort of move in a different direction? What should it look like, in your opinion?
You go, Alex.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, I don't know that, it's really kind of like community service. I can't make someone else do something. So I would say I would not put any kind of dictum on someone else. However, I would say that I feel that it's incumbent upon me as a person of color that when I have the mic or when I have the pen in my hand to be sensitive to those issues which don't get highlighted in the mass media. In other words, I need to bring I feel incumbent upon myself when it fits the plot line to bring an awareness to those who may not have seen this particular perspective before, because those voices don't get heard in mass-produced outlet of media and product works, rather, in books. And I think that since I do have that awareness, that I should share that. And it really is a lot of what writing is about anyway, regardless of race. It's sharing an awareness that your reader may not be aware of, or bringing something else, a new thought to them. And I think I think you should try to bring that awareness when you can, but just keep it within the whatever the plot leads you.
I take a stronger viewpoint. I write So and So, which is basically heroic fiction based on African culture and traditions. I do it because, one, I felt like young black men, and black people especially, needed hero images. When we think about people like Conan and different things like that, we never see a black person in that capacity, and with the exception of Immoral, which was written by Charles Saunders years ago. And so that's what I do. I do it for two reasons. One, because I feel like we as a people need those type of images, and two, because it's a way to educate people about our culture and our history. I call it you entertain and then educate. When Gladiator came out, everybody got into the movie, and then everybody wanted to know everything about gladiators. Not because they wanted to know about gladiators, because they wanted to know something about Marcus Aurelius and everything like that, So what I found out in my work is that when we discuss my book Meji, people want to know about the characters, and when we talk about the characters, they want to know about where the origins came from. So when I start talking about the Zulu, and I start talking about the Xhosa, and I start talking about these different African tribes and different history, people are listening now, because I'm not talking about the Xhosa, I'm talking about where the character's from, and they want to know that. So I think that's really important. Again, like I said earlier, as far as what black science fiction should be, I don't think you can describe it specifically.
That's a cop-out.
No, I don't. I really don't. I think it's now I can say that there are some, like I said, there are some stories that are told from a perspective where only a black person could tell it from. I mean, when you start talking about the issue of slavery, to me, you can, as a black person, you can talk about it more passionately because it's a part of your history and your experience. When you start talking about science fiction that includes racism, again, that's something that we have a sensitivity to, that we can bring an emotion to it that most people can't bring to it. So in that situation, I mean, and if you put it in a scientific or use a scientific background, then you've got, I guess would be considered black science fiction. But if you take it 3,000 years in the future, like you say, it depends. I have a story that's written in the future, and I would consider it black science fiction because it's basically Nigerian space program. The people that they encounter are people that are based on Yoruba, the Yoruba culture. So in that case, it would be. But I think it's the more I've had these discussions, the more I would say it's hard to define, to say what it is and say like this is black science fiction, and this is not. So it's kind of a moving target.
Okay, so I do want to ask this question because of the descriptions that you guys just gave, and I know, Alicia, you probably have something to add to the conversation, but I really want to know. So so you're saying that black people, or black people in this instance, can write about specific kinds of experiences in specific kinds of ways, or more evocative ways, or something, or because of our relationship to those experiences. Exactly. So then, even if a person who is not a black person, maybe they are Asian, and they have done the research, and they know, maybe they have a PhD in African history, and they decide to write a novel about, based on some of their research and based on their understanding of how that all plays out. And all the characters are black, and the history, it's all based in that African, pulling from that knowledge that they have of that world at that time. Is this black science fiction?
OMG. It just depends. Because I don't know, because say for example, because I do YA and I'm a school librarian, I oftentimes give my students Rick Riordan's The Kane Chronicles. And Rick Riordan, he is very far removed from being a little black boy. But I read it.
I keep telling you, give him my books.
Okay.
My book has I'm a black girl, but that's not as far from a little black boy. Anyway, go ahead.
Hey, I'm just saying. So I think Rick actually did a very good job. Now, I'm going to be honest. It's a couple of parts in there. I'm like, Rick, you just missed it,
That's what I'm talking about.
But I think it's close enough where it's a decent enough story where I didn't feel like I had uprising. Now, Milton probably doesn't want me to talk about Save the Pearls.
Please don't. See, you just advertising for it.
I know, he doesn't like to talk about it. But, okay, that book just pissed me off. So, in answer to your question, it's hard to say. It depends on where the author is coming from, what frame of reference, what they're searching or what they're stretching to do in their works.
Well, I kind of disagree with that. You can do all the research you want about the black experience and about slavery, but to have that as part of your life, to be able to reach into that experience, I mean, to be able to look back at your family, and to me, as a black person, I'm going to bring an emotion to that. I'm going to go there. I'm not going to be thinking about, well, if I write this, let me make sure I don't offend any of the white readers because I don't want to talk about this because this may be something they don't want to talk about. I'm going to go there because it's my experience. And it's something that as a black person that, you know, if I'm going to describe that experience that I want to share with people and I want them to feel that. I want them to feel, you know, the whole, and I think I could probably express it better because again, it's coming from me from the inside. You know, growing up in a black church and listening to these spirituals that were, you know, that evolved from the slave experience, you know, and listening to, you know, old black folks sing those songs the way they sing them. You can feel that emotion in those songs. And so when I'm writing this, I'm trying to bring all that. I'm trying to put all that in there. And I think you have to come from that experience. Just like, for instance, I don't write about modern Africa because I'm African American. I can't write about what's going on in Nigeria like a Nigerian can because that's their experience. I can't write about growing up in Kenya like a person from Kenya can, and I would undoubtedly make some mistakes. So, you know, our experience is so unique to us, and especially growing up down south, that I just don't feel like a person can bring that emotion to that writing like we can, and bring that feeling into it when you're basing it on something like that.
Okay, if I can just add this, I think 20 years ago I would have said no, but just the way the world is changing, you know, particularly when you travel. I travel a lot for work, and I've worked all over the country basically, and just seeing the blending of families and cultures across this country, maybe not as much on Atlanta or the East Coast as out west, but I think that day is changing, and there's one author I think about is Alexander McCall, who wrote #1 Ladies Detective Agency series. I think that his voice rings very true, and I haven't lived there, but I went to Africa on a relief trip, South Africa, Swaziland, and whatnot, and his depiction, you know, rings very true, and he seems to have a real love for African people, and I think that's really what it's about. If someone can identify with another group and has a real love for that group, I think that I can't use the word can't. I do think, though, that it is more of a challenge, and I think you're more likely to have someone who has grown up in the African experience or African diaspora. I think they're more likely to have a voice that's, quote, you know, depicting black science fiction, but I wouldn't say that someone of another race couldn't.
And I have one more thing that I like to say is the flip side of it, because there are a lot of authors who are not minority or not a person of color who could write or add characters of colors to their stories, and they just don't. And that's kind of irritating too, you know?
Well, okay, so that's a good question, because actually that was sort of where I was going to go to next in terms of thinking sort of more broadly about representations of black people in science fiction, fantasy, in the larger field, and thinking about what kinds of representations we're seeing, the quality and the character of those representations, and some of your thoughts about that. Like, what are we seeing now? Has it changed at all? Are we still getting a lot of the same? Well, how do we feel about the books that are where there are no people of color? I mean, you know, I read series where there aren't people of color. How do we feel about the series where there may be a person of color but they're cardboard? They're two-dimensional. Would we rather have the series that has no people of color than a two-dimensional kind of token figure? So what do we think about the ways that we're seeing people of color, and particularly black people, represented in the in the larger sort of field of sci-fi fantasy?
Well, I know for me, there are several authors that I really enjoy reading. And I know that Sherilyn Kenyon, I remember reading one of her series. It was a YA series with the Nick Chronicles. And she had a character that had sister locks. And it's sister locks to me because I got sister locks 12 years ago, and it's a lot of black folks that don't know what sister locks were. And I'm like, how the heck, and I wrote a blog post, how the heck did Sherilyn Kenyon know about some sister locks? And do you know she tweeted me back, you need to be in my shoes, Alicia, you would know. I was like, what? So I guess what I'm saying is it is possible, and she did a very, very good job with it. It wasn't she wasn't I think it's Minyara wasn't a major character, but she was a critical part to that story. And so I felt comfortable with that, and I wanted to read more of her books because that character was in there. On the other hand, there's some other authors, who I won't mention, who they don't do it very well, but you know that they could do some extra research. You know, they could go that distance. And I think in the 21st century, it's a multicultural, multiracial world. We all should be pushing towards that, and that is rather much of my mission, to try to get people to begin to add these characters of color to science fiction. It just doesn't make any sense to have these worlds that are just white. It makes no sense at all.
Well, I feel like if you're going to put a character in there, the character should have a purpose in the story. I don't want any story where somebody's just going to throw a black guy in there because they feel like, hey, we forgot to put the black guy in there. So, okay, well, let's throw him in there. And then, of course, he doesn't do anything. He just kind of walks around like a robot. And he's just the black guy. Exactly. He's always going to be the stereotypical black person. He's not going to be a multi, range and like all of us are. He's going to be very stereotypical and do the things that the reader thinks a black person should do. And in that case, if that's the way I got to come to the party, then don't invite me. That's the way I look at it. But if you're gonna, if the person is an integral part of the process, and if you make sure he's not going to be the first person to die.
You know what was interesting? When I was watching Transformers, the first Transformers that came out, and the Latino person was the first person to die. I was like, oh.
I guess Michael Bay decided to put a spin on it.
Well, it could just sort of speak to kind of...
Well, he couldn't kill off Tyrese. He had to keep Tyrese. Yeah. That was Tyrese. He couldn't kill Tyrese off.
But it could also sort of speak to shifting perception of, Latino populations and the threat they may. Anyway.
But I think that we as black writers need to bring that dimension to the genre, and we haven't been allowed to through major publishing, and that's been the issue. I mean, I have friends who are black writers who have been told point blank, that's a great story, but black people don't read science fiction, so if you can change these characters to white, then I'll publish it.
So please read science
so it's and we read it. I mean, all of us read it. I mean,
and tell people you do.
You're going to read it no matter what, But to have, to have that told to you, and to be discouraged like that, that was one of the main reasons when I first started submitting stuff. I just kind of got away from it, and when I decided to do Media, I did it on my own because I was like, the average editor is not going to accept this story. Not the way I'm writing it. Even when I can give you a perfect example. Most of us know about the Shaka Zulu thing. Shaka Zulu was like, we grew up watching Shaka, but they had to tell Shaka Zulu from the point of the British person, remembering Shaka. It couldn't just be about Shaka. It had to be from another perspective that they felt like the audience could relate to and stuff. Yeah. So as far as that's concerned, given more well-rounded black characters, I believe that's up to us as black writers to do that. We can't depend on other people to do stuff for us or to do us right. We have to do that.
Yeah. Well, I was just saying on a side note too. You were mentioning the Transformers, and when they had I don't know which one it was. They had the two little robots speaking Ebonics and stuff. And there's certain offenses that really make you want to walk out of the movie theater. That was one of them.
The word for that.
I hated that. That's what not to do. But, I agree with Mel. I think that we have to bring that voice, and You know, and you know, we talk about, you know, the black character being the first to die, and that's just like an offering, you know, PC offering, basically. You know, well, he was in there, you know. That's to his SAG credit or whatever. But you know, like I said before, you know, my thing is, if something rings true in the storyline, you know, then of course, by all means, do what you need to do. But I think you know, just doing it for the sake of doing it, just so you can say that you had someone in there of color in there, I think that's sad.
Okay, and so I'm going to sort of bring this one last question to you all, and then we'll get your responses, and then we're going to open up the floor to comments and conversation. So you guys be thinking about your questions. We don't have a mic. Y'all can just get up and shout. So what do you think are the possibilities of more black people writing science fiction, more black people reading science fiction, more representation of black people in this genre? What are the pitfalls of maybe perhaps not embracing this genre, or black people's sort of participation in and production in the genre? So it's a couple of different questions, but sort of possibilities and pitfalls to wrap us up.
I'm real passionate about the possibilities because I'm out selling my books on a regular basis. I think there's two types of audiences when you talk about African Americans when it comes to science fiction. There are those of us who already read it. We're going to read it no matter what. You know, I started off reading Asimov, Heinlein, Clark. You know, of course, when Octavia Butler came out, I read her stuff. You know, I read Steve Barnes. I read Samuel Delany. You know, although at the time when I read Samuel Delany, I didn't know he was black, but, you know, I found out later on. But then there are those people who don't read science fiction because there aren't any black characters in it. And those are the people that I meet on a regular basis when I'm selling my books face to face. And that'll be somebody that'll see my book and say, well, I didn't even know that there was characters like this, you know, and then they'll read the book. So I think there's a huge amount of growth in that. As far as black science fiction appealing to a cultural audience, a multicultural audience, the books that I write, like I told you about The Sword and Soul, I'm selling them across the board. I had a guy from Australia send me an email saying, you know, when I wrote my book, Chamba Safari, he said, you know, thanks for writing this book. You just exposed me to a part of history I didn't know about. Because Chamba Safari takes place in 15th century Swahili coast. And he didn't know anything about that. And when he read it, he looked it up and said, okay, this guy's making up a bunch of bull. And he saw this was real history there. So what I'm seeing is that what it really comes down to is writing a good story. You can write a good story, people are going to read it. We had a meeting with the Atlanta Science Fiction Society, and they said the exact same thing. They said, if it's a good story, I don't care what color the character is. Just tell me a good story. Again, the thing has been, we have not been allowed to tell our stories, but only in a certain way. But now that we've got the independent movement going on, we can tell our stories exactly the way we want to. We can tell them eloquently. And I just use one last example. We have an anthology called Griots, which is a collection of short stories by black writers writing Sword and Soul. And that book has been selling like gangbusters. We got reviews from Ron Fortier, if I don't know if you guys know him, and everybody's giving this book rave reviews. And these are all stories, sword and sorcery stories, sword and soul stories, main characters black, heroic characters, and it's selling across the board. You know, so as far as I see it, I don't really see any pitfalls in it. All I see is positive. You know.
I think for me, I would agree. When I thought about writing the Genetic Revolution series, I would think about what African Americans, we're very visual, we like action, we like plot, and I'm gonna say, we like science fiction if it's told in a way that's interesting and interactive and conducive to what makes us interested. And I don't think that's been done. And so I agree with Milton, as these authors who are indie and self-published, as they begin to tell these stories, I think they're going to do it in a way that touches that style and that interest. So I would say that. I think there's a lot of possibilities available as well. But it needs to be told in a way that's of interest.
Yeah. I would just add to that, too. I think, too, you know, it's about what we're doing differently. it's about what we're doing differently as well, but it's also about how the fan base and potential fan base is changing and how the world is changing. I think that science and science fiction are becoming cool, even though people still hate math.
Okay.
But I actually work in technology, and I see the next generation just seeing more and more African Americans, particularly women too, getting more and more involved in science. As people are really, things like iPads and whatnot, and all in the internet and stuff. I mean, 20 years ago, me being in IT, it was like, oh, that's only something that I would do. But now everybody's hooked on technology, and I think that science fiction has its premise and its basis in possibilities and what the future holds in development of technology. So I'm thinking that just the awareness and the openness to read Black science fiction is going to only improve in the future.
And now that we've had this,
one quick thing I wanted to
Sure.
mention too. When you don't write people of color, when you don't put African descended people into futuristic stories, that's almost like erasing them from the future. And I think that's very important because Star Trek had an impact on our society. It changed. When Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura kissed, that was the first interracial kiss, and that changed the world. And so when you have these futuristic stories and you don't put people of color in there, that's like saying we don't exist there. And that's not right.
that's what I was going to say, but you got it. All right, we have just been joined by Wendy Raven McNair. Wendy is a wife, mother, and storyteller currently working on a young adult fantasy trilogy. Her stories celebrate African-American teen girls, a group that has been consistently absent from the fantasy genre. She tries to entertain and inspire readers by transporting them to a world of surprising possibilities. Says McNair, she's here. That's what she says. That's what she said. It's incredibly rewarding when readers tell me they enjoyed the characters I fantasized into print. McNair believes reading is the ultimate mental escape and strives to write stories that take readers on a fascinating literary ride. Books 1 and 2 of her series, Asleep and Awake, are already available, and she is currently working on Ascend, which is the final book in the trilogy. And with that introduction, we're going to open the floor. We've been having a pretty good conversation, but we've been having the conversation, so we definitely like to hear your all's questions and your all's comments. And I'm thinking, we can just get up and shout. I'll just call on you, and then, okay, so this gentleman in the front.
I had a question, and it's related to the state of science fiction here. It's in the Hunger Games recently.
Oh, right. I was going to ask him.
The character Rue was portrayed as black in the novel and in the movie. When the movie came out, so many people apparently visualized her some other way and were very angry. I'd love to hear what your thoughts on that.
I got to ask this question. Can I answer questions now, people?
Yeah, you can.
Okay. I'm doing a lot of asking. I got to ask this question a little while ago, and I find it really interesting because I think it's kind of telling about what the expectation is as to who's going to be represented in this genre. And because when you read the book, there's no other way around it. She's black. I don't know what they definitely call both of the tributes from District 11 have dark brown skin. So there's no other way around it. So the fact that you can read those words and yet still somehow conceptualize it differently and be that upset, that Katniss would be that upset about the death of a little brown girl, really kind of speaks to what, number one, the expectation of people when they're reading certain kinds of books. I think there's an expectation that actually extends beyond fantasy. I think that there's a way that those things get glossed over. But then also, why what we're doing is so important, so that it doesn't become a shock to the system to see black characters in these universes, whether they are black characters written by black people or black characters written by other people. It should not have aroused such ire.
See those people post on Twitter. I think some people just gonna be shocked.
Can you? I'm sorry. Can you stand up and speak up?
I just feel like some people are just gonna be shocked regardless. If you saw those Twitter posts, those people, you're not gonna get.
Well, the thing about it is
People make you
that
sad.
there's a way of getting around it, which might be kind of straightforward. I mean, you can describe a person as being, dark brown skin, and you can assume they were black, or you can say they were black, and then there's no assuming. You know right then and there it's just a black character.
Yeah, but we don't know in the universe whether or not black and or white people exist.
Well, if it's supposed to be based on America, and if you're writing about if you're writing about in the context of this country, if I say a character's black, it's black. If you say he's dark brown, it might be a person that got a good tan. It's just kind of like I love David Anthony Durham's book Acacia, but when he described his people as being olive skinned, and that was supposed to be a change in the fantasy, I was like, okay, olive skinned, they can be from Italy. That's how people describe Italians and Greeks, olive skinned. So, and I think that's basically a marketing ploy of the publishers hedging their bets. They're trying not to turn off a certain point of their groups, of their audience, their perceived audience. So they say, well, instead of you doing it like this, why don't you say that they were brown skin, because tawny colored, because you get that. I mean, people don't really, you get that from editors. You get that from them. They will tell you, because once they get that book in their hand, they will come and tell you, okay, we like this book, but you need to change that. And you're this hungry writer, and this guy's already giving you this 6-figure advance. So if he tells you that this person needs to look like this, then you're going to do it because you want to get that money. But you can be clear. You can be clear in a way. I think that book could have been written, and that character could have been described in a way where there would have been no doubt of what the child was. I understand the universe thing, but if I had said the two black people from so and so, then when the movie came out, you would have known exactly what they expected. They wouldn't be like, oh, they're not tanned?
Okay, yeah, we'll take Alan, and then we'll take this gentleman in the black shirt, and then we got a couple more.
I was going to say, I need just to follow up on.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. But let me just say this. I do feel like, if you look at the whole people of color experience around the world and whatnot, color line moves from country to country, and I do think the gentleman's point of what universe you're in makes a difference. In other words, in the future, we're going to describe people based on their phenotype. We're not going to worry about their genetic line. 1 drop, 1/16, all this kind of stuff. Yeah. If you're brown, if you're black, whatever you are, people are going to go with that. So if I'm talking about a future state, then I really don't have, me personally, a particular problem with that. And the second thing is, obviously, these people on these posting these Twitter posts don't read, or they. Now, a lot of people say they read a book, and what they really did is they got an abridged copy, or they read the first chapter and the last chapter, and they read the middle. And a lot of people said, they read on Wikipedia, and then Cliff Notes. Here's Cliff Notes, like retro technology with Cliff Notes. Now you have Wikipedia, and it's like. Yeah, you carry Cliff Notes around. But anyway, I think a lot of that is just, when someone writes stuff like that, and then too, just my personal experience in life, mean people are typically stupid.
Nobody in here.
I wasn't going to say that. I was trying not to say that, but...
I got a question to the panel of 2 parts. It's one on independent publishing, and have you guys ever heard of, J.C. Hudson or Scott Sigler or Mur Lafferty? They're pretty big in the audiobook kind of podcasting arena. And I know Scott Sigler, he's the beast right now. He has a contract with a Canadian publisher, and he has his own publishing company. So he's working both. But he took 5 years to build his audience. Then he walked that to the publisher. So my question to the panel, have y'all thought about doing audiobooks? Because I'm a big audiobook person because I work a lot. And also sometimes I have time to read. But usually I'm in the car on my way to work. I don't listen to radio no more. I'm doing audiobooks in the car. So have you thought about possibly doing audiobooks as another avenue to expand your brand?
If you call me, I will read my book to you.
I would say something, but we got guests in the room. I would say
whoa, I didn't mean to go there. Okay, all right.
My next question is, looking at that new business model and EPUB and everything on that level, are you guys kind of looking at these pioneers and seeing how they move and possibly going outside of publishing and trying to establish a big base? Because I'm a big supporter of independent music, independent authors, if you doing it, I know that she's doing it out of your pocket, and I would drop my dollar faster than for somebody in New York on the New York Best Times list. So y'all like thought about that sort of stuff? Because I know Scott is here, and you can talk to him about his experience. And I'm a big fan of Scott.
I want to say this. My son, Alicia McCalla, he's a freshman at Morehouse College. When I came out with my series, the Genetic Revolution series, he said, "Mama, I want to make you a song." And that boy made a song.
It's a good song.
It's a good song.
Y'all can look for her book trailer. Is it on YouTube?
It is on YouTube.
Check her book trailer out. It's got the song in it.
That's my baby. He's a second generation Morehouse. But that's one of the things that I was trying to go for. I was trying to mix up those media. So I had the series, which I wrote it in an interactive way. I selected models or characters who look like, interesting teens, and I try to kind of create an environment that kids will respond to and really enjoy and like. And so the music really goes along with that very well. I think it works anyway.
Well, that's the reason why I named my company MV Media instead of MV Media Publishing, because my plan is to build a foundation with the novels, and then use that foundation to get into graphic novels, to get into video. Music I never really thought about, but that's my whole plan, because I don't think that we can build a strong structure with just the novels. That we have to be looking at all different areas and all different foundations. One of the gentlemen that's not here tonight, Balagun Ojitade, we just did a short film that we're going to show tonight. That is part of a process that we're working on to take some of the things that we've developed and move them into a visual aspect, because people prefer visual. We do book signings and book presentations all the time. We get 30 or 40 people. We did a Black Science Fiction Film Festival about 2-3 weeks ago, and we got 120 people. So we see where we need to move as far as that's concerned. As far as audiobooks, that's something that somebody's brought to me before. I thought about getting people to do it. I can't do it because I don't think anybody wants to hear science fiction read in a Southern accent. So I said, I'm not gonna, they will come around here and that but I understand what you're talking about.
The follow-up is more of a theater performance. It's taking your book and moving it into a theater realm because of the actor reading the book.
There's a brother in England that's a Facebook friend of mine that has a thing called Horizon Venture. And he's done exactly what you do. He's a jazz musician. And what he's done, he's taken his story and he's applied visual, he's applied music, and he's applied everything to it. And you get this whole total sensual experience because you're getting the music, you're getting the words, you're getting the visuals. And they've been doing it, performing it in England. And I've been getting in contact with them saying, hey, man, I wish you guys would record this and send it to us over here so we could, send it across the pond to us so we can show this and see what's going on and stuff. But so people are thinking in that way. I think it's coming, but I think all of us are new. We're in a process. You have to build your foundation. Unfortunately, as entrepreneurs and as people of color, we have to kind of reinvest in ourselves. So it takes time, but I think it's coming.
I'm gonna go ahead and get this young lady. Yes.
I think it was Mr. Davis who mentioned Octavia Butler, who recently died in 2006, which is one of my favorites. And so kind of I had already been anticipating that. And so I kind of want to know, we've been talking about the state of black science fiction, but I've heard a lot of male names thrown around. So what is the state of black science fiction by black women?
Well, Nnedi Okorafor is a woman. Her name, she's Igbo. She's from Nigeria. And she's the one that just won the World Fantasy Award for Best Novel with her book, Who Fears Death. You got Nalo Hopkinson, who is a Caribbean writer and, of course, a black female. She's been written a number of books. I can't remember the name of any of her books. There's another sister by the name of Nisi Shaw, who writes a lot of short stories. So there are a lot of, there's Alicia McCalla and
Ellen Davis, Wendy Raven McNair.
No, all of these people that I'm mentioning to you right now are mainstream published. You got Tenerife Dew,
and they just released with her husband Stephen Barnes. They wrote Devil's Wake.
Yeah, Devil's Wake, which is a zombie book. And she is actually here in Atlanta now. She's a teacher at Spelman now, and she is actually working on a presentation for next year called Black to the Future. And they're talking about forming an Octavia Butler Society at the college. So there's a lot of stuff going on right now.
I do kind of have the second part to my question. We were talking about if there are specific characteristics that make Black science fiction fiction. And I completely agree that there's a certain degree to which only African Americans can write Black science fiction because of the shared memory and the shared history. In that vein, can only Black women write Black science fiction about like specifically, because I think Black women have a very specific experience that maybe Black men can't understand with that emotion you were talking about.
That's true. I agree with you.
Well, I wrote a short story that Milton sometimes don't like really talk about. It's called Flee, and I specifically dealt with the issues of domestic violence and female genital mutilation. It's an adult. How old are you?
I'm 23.
Okay, very good. You can read it. And I went there with this paranormal serial killer who's chasing down African American girls and stealing their souls. And so it's a freebie, so you can go on Amazon. Oh, here's my promo. Flee, Alicia McCalla. You can go download it on Kindle, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, all those places. And so that was my task. I was trying to come up with an issue that I felt like related to Black women's issues. And you know, the funniest thing, Flee has hit it went up to number 800 on Amazon as far as downloads were concerned, but nobody made any comments. And I think because of the subject matter is so sensitive that people just don't want to discuss it. You know, something about those female issues are just hard for some people to discuss.
Well, Nettie's book, Who Fears Death, talks about genital mutilation. And she's been attacked by people from Nigeria because there are people who are traditional African, religion, and that's part of the culture. And they have a problem with her speaking against that culture. But it's just something that she feels strongly about. That's one aspect of the book.
I don't know if I would say that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Wendy.
Sorry, I'd like to jump in here. First, my apologies for being late. I am seriously jet lagged. Just got in from South Africa a couple of days ago, and my husband was supposed to wake me up. So yes, I'm blaming my husband. Yes, but yes, but I did want to address the question about the authors of fiction. Basically, you were saying Black people writing Black characters, and earlier. I don't necessarily agree that only Black people can write stories about Black people. And in that same vein, only women can write stories about women. I do believe that the gatekeepers have quite often, the gatekeepers from traditional publishing, have kept the people from telling their own stories. And so you will have like the majority opinion, they will get their stories out. And so you won't see a lot of Black authors telling stories about Black people. You may not see as many women telling stories, their own stories. And then the ones that you do see, the ones that become popular, then you look at the authors and they are not the people reflected in their stories. So that's my problem with that type of writing.
I'm going to say something really quickly, and then I want to we can have some more conversation about this because we've got a couple other questions. But I do want to say that I think that part of it is not necessarily only we can tell those stories, but there's some stories that only we would think to tell because of I don't have any experience with female genital mutilation, so that's not something that I would think to tell. But coming out of that culture, that might be a story that you want to tell, and you can tell it in a particular kind of way because you've had that experience. And so I think that that's the way that I would answer that question. That it's not that that it is our exclusive domain and nobody else should dare to trespass. Exactly. But I just think that that sometimes the things that are important and the stories that we think should be told are not the stories that other people might think need to be told. And that's what makes, that's a particular kind of contribution that, Black women writing science fiction, black people writing science fiction, Asian people writing science fiction, but this is about Black people. But that we make to the genre. But I'm going to move on from this question. I know Alan has something to say, but is it really, really important?
Well, just really quick.
Go on.
Just really quick. I just wanted to say, whether or not someone can write from this perspective, that I think is relevant how well they do it. Like I said before, Alexander McCall wrote very well #1 Lady Detective Agency from a Black female applicant's perspective. John Le Carre, who I really like his book, but the one book he wrote from a female perspective was his worst book ever. So, I think it just depends. My next book is actually written, there are 4 aunties, 4 sisters, talking about their experiences in the 1960s. So, hopefully it will be well written.
Okay, this young lady and then the young woman in the red shirt, red sweater. You guys had your hands up for a while.
Yeah, this is just kind of a comment in general, but I found that a lot of times we discuss things like, oh, Black science fiction, specifically, what is it? And, it always ends up being about the readership and, cultivating the readership. And I think at the heart of the idea of who is reading specifically African-American science fiction has a lot to do with, too, our understanding of regular science fiction. Because a lot of times, as a person of color, you see your accents, but you also are accepting it as the universal norm. And the idea behind that is that when you're accepting something as like a universal norm, then it ends up being one of those things where what you have to bring to it is so specific that sometimes I feel like when we talk about it or think about it that way, we're not inviting other people to see our experiences as universalizing. For example, can somebody who doesn't have, who is African American write about slavery as well as somebody who's African American? Probably not. But are there some universal lessons or something that come out of that? You know what I mean? A lot of times we don't get to that point. We get to the point of just, you're the only person who needs to write it, but then we don't get to the point of, well, what's the universal thing that you can learn from it, that anybody who reads this work can learn from it.
And I think that that's an important point because I feel like there's a way that some of the language can almost sound like we're excluding people from participating in in this production. And I'm wary of that because I think that we were at Georgia Tech, we did this panel first at Georgia Tech, and somebody asked the question about whether it was limiting to sort of focus on specifically African American or Black experience, and I think it's just what you were saying, this goes back to something that was saying, that if the story is good, and I'd never lived on Stratford upon Avon or whatever. I was not. Me and Shakespeare, we didn't hang out in the same place, but I understand Shakespeare on a level, even though that's 400 or 500 years old now. I never went to Hogwarts and learned how to say expecto patronum, but there were things in Harry Potter that I Guardian Leviosa. I'm saying it correctly. And I see Leanne in the background, so I think that's okay. Well, I'm gonna shout you out later. But they're making this thing Auror's Tales, which is like the Harry Potter universe, but set in America, and Leanne actually participates in that. She's
That's
awesome.
my buddy back there.
But sorry. There are things that people can relate to, even though it is an experience that is outside of what they understand. And I don't think that we should talk about what we're writing at, because I don't think that it's de facto exclusionary or anything like that. I think if it's a good story, then people can tap into it where they can. And then where they're not tapping in, they learn something new. Right?
Anybody can pick up a book. Anybody reads a book is going to get a different experience from it, based on what they bring to it. By writing it, because I had somebody ask me that question when I wrote my books. A guy was interviewing me. He said, well, are you concerned about the fact that because your book is so specific on African culture that white people won't read it? I said, no, I'm not concerned about that, because I'm just trying to tell my story. But I think that if they took the time to read it, they will see that there are things in there that they can relate to, because it's a good story. And I don't think there's anything exclusive about what we do. Every writer is writing for themselves first and foremost. You know, they're writing a story that they want to tell, and we hope that other people will want to read that story and experience it as well, and they're going to bring their experiences from it and get whatever they can out of it. But I don't think it's what we're doing is exclusive, because the books are available to everybody. If you're interested, you can read it. I had a person complain one time because they were saying that they didn't want their science fiction book in the African American section. And I said, well, the last time I looked in Barnes & Noble, there wasn't a rope keeping people from walking to the African American section. If the book's in the African American section, you go to the section, you buy the book. So I don't think it's an exclusiveness. I don't look at it as being that way. Again, it's a book, and if it interests you, you'll read it. If it doesn't, then you won't.
I agree, and I find it surprising that in music we don't have those type of questions. I'm sorry. In music, they don't ask those type of questions. If your music, if you have music that's sung by black artists and performed by black artists, do you think white people won't be interested? We don't have that type of question.
I think we did at one time. I think there was that question at one time, but we moved past that. But
exactly,
we moved past it in one place.
And so are you saying that in literature we
maybe haven't necessarily moved as far past.
I think we're still
This young lady in the red sweater, and then I think I saw a gentleman with his hand raised.
And the lady back there, she's had her hand up for a while.
Okay, and those will be our last three, because we're at about 50 after.
If you go back to the the 80s and early 90s, you had a lot more black shows on television, more variety. Why do you think there was a decline in that? And do you think that if there were still more black television shows out there, that it would be easier for black authors to get their works published? Or do you think you would need to be having the readership base would actually translate into having more black shows on television and movies?
Can I answer that?
Go for it.
No, I was going to say you have less shows, period. I mean, reality TV taking over is a monetary thing. They don't have to pay nearly as much for reality TV as they do for scripted shows. Right. So you're having fewer and fewer opportunities for black actresses, white actresses, Latino actresses, across the board. So I think that's systemic across the board. And then secondly, too, on the positive side, I think you are seeing more black actors and actresses participating in majority productions and having meaningful roles. Maybe not so much in movies, but in TV at least. But even that pie is getting small.
I think basically it's a wave. I think it's a term I use. Sometimes we're in style. In the 80s and 90s, we were in style. Everybody wanted to see us. Cosby and stuff like that. Bill Cosby had a lot to do with a lot of these shows coming out because of the fact that he was successful. I think you're seeing more. Really, you're seeing more black shows, but they're on black television stations. They're on Bounce and places like that because Tyler Perry came out and he did his thing, and so now everybody wants to emulate that. So you're starting to see a lot of, I guess, Tyler Perry style situation comedies because again, Hollywood's driven by dollars, like Alan said, and if they see that's what's making dollars, that's what they're going to do. I think the changes in that industry is going to come again from independent people making these stories and going out and putting them in. The internet has opened up so much. There are web series out. There's a web series out called Osiris, which is about a black immortal guy, and then there's another one I think it's called Silent Hill. That's a post-apocalyptic stuff that has a main black character. I don't know about that one. You talk about that one. But all these things are on the web, and it's out there,
Look at the awkward black girls.
Yeah. I think there's an independent film that just came out called The Beast. It was on Oprah.
The Beast of the Southern Wild?
Yeah, The Beast of the Southern Wild. That just came out.
And I think that this comment about, the independent, and when you think back about it, back even on the surge that we saw in the 80s, coming out of what became blaxploitation films in the 70s, and folks like Robert Townsend who were making money, making movies using their credit cards and so forth and so on. But I guess it showed that there was an audience, and I think that that's kind of what what we need to continue to do in order to build sort of to open doors for representation in terms of this particular genre is to show that there's an audience for it, because I think that the perception persists that black folks don't read it. White folks aren't going to want to read stories about little black kids, or little black girls, or Changa on his safari. So I think that and I you said, Alicia, that nobody's commented on your book. I sold a lot of copies of my book. I have like 11 reviews on Amazon. And that makes a difference, because if people, first of all, people don't know how many copies of my book I've sold, but the more people are demonstrating their support. So if you read indie authors and they're available on Amazon, go and write a review. If you get to 50 reviews on Amazon, Amazon starts putting your book everywhere. So if you're reading indie authors and you want to support them, go and write them a review, because then Amazon's going to start telling other people about it. So it doesn't, because that's the thing. Like, we can only reach as many people as we reach, but then the audience has to demonstrate that they are there and they are
interested.
I think, okay, so where do we have...
young lady back there, she's had her hand up.
Okay, young lady who's had her hand up for a long time, and then this gentleman here.
Earlier in the conversation, and we were
can you stand up so we can see you?
Stand up, we can.
We were discussing whether or not we would read something that didn't have black characters in it. And I, for one, I don't mind that at all. Like the gentleman in the light colored shirt. I read Stackhouse novels before True Blood, and there were no black characters except for the one that got killed off quickly. Yeah, it had happened. And it didn't bother me because of the setting. And then what happened with True Blood was very disappointing. Was they created a black character, and it ended up being a sassy black chick with the broken home, and her mother was sleeping with the minister, and I would much rather have had a white cast. So, but then going to what we've just been discussing, I do see change, because I started going to conventions over 20 years ago, and when you saw another black person, we would stop and double take. It would never have happened 20 years ago. And so I think it's incumbent on us as consumers to let the majority know that we are here and we're reading. And like you said, write reviews, not just write reviews, but write to publishers and say, I'm a geek, I'm a black geek, and I want to do black geek things, I want to see black geeks. And it's incumbent on us to let...
I'm a white geek, and I'd like to see more diverse universes represented in the books that you're publishing. Whatever.
Not put words in it. Not put words in it.
No, please take this down verbatim. No, okay.
Because people making those decisions now were there with me at cons when I was a kid, and they didn't see any black people. So it's like, oh, so they don't do conventions, they probably don't do a lot of science fiction, they're not going to spend money on us. And as we can see, Dragoncon, it's not cheap. We're here, we got cash, we're sick. I don't $5. So, and I'm sure they want our $3. So I think there is change. As depressing as it is that we're not seeing a lot of black characters that we want to see that represent us without the sound from the hood or being the Urkels, there has been change, and we just have to make sure that we continue to push it forward.
That was one of the things I had. I don't know if you guys remember Zachary, I think it's Jurgenon. He wrote an article where he talked about the race of authors and them adding multicultural characters in their stories. And it was in the science fiction fan magazine? Well, anyway, since Zachary is a white guy, I asked him to come on my blog and to write about what it meant for him to, think multicultural. And it was, that post has gotten several thousand hits because people want to know. It's very important, white males, for you to say, I will buy a story with a black girl on the cover. Okay. Wow. Say that verbatim.
We have about 4 minutes left, so can we get his question, and then there's going to be time for conversation afterwards. And then I also want to allow you guys time to just sort of plug your websites if you'd like to. So let's get your question, let's get a couple of quick answers, and then wrap it up.
Okay, my question is thinking about how mainstream authors portray characters. We talk about one end where they're usually stereotypes like the sassy friend or something like that. But I also read books where they're the other end, they're a well-formed character, but at some point the author says, oh, by the way, they're black. you know, I've read an author, I read a book where you have a character who's the leader of an entire star nation, tons of planets under her domain, and then by about the third book, you've seen this person for 3 books, you finally realize when you meet her, oh, she's black. But the author doesn't really make a big deal about it. Yeah, exactly. So, you know, and the thing about that is because of the way David Weber looks at culture, and some authors look at culture like that as a dynamic thing where you know, 4,000 years from now, where he writes that black culture pretty much doesn't exist. It's pretty much tied to nations. So, but the way you know it's written in black science fiction is different. And finally getting to my question is, what do you think makes a character? What do you think makes a black character in science fiction, as opposed to a character who just happens to be black?
The one question I have to say, 4,000 years before today, you have black culture. And 4,000 years after today, you're going to have some black culture. I mean, that's just it. I think it's hard to pretend as if all of this is going to go away. It's simply not. And so it's hard for me to think that we won't exist. And that's what I was saying, you know, if you don't write these characters of color and you don't put them in the future and you don't share those cultural aspects, you're essentially erasing us from history. And I don't think that's right. That's just my rant.
Well, can I just say, I do think 2 things. I think that what makes something a black character, I think, is bringing, like I said earlier, you may not have been in the room, that having a black voice, being someone that brings a black voice or a person of color voice to the table. Because I think a lot of mainstream publications, that voice is missing. And I think that's my definition of that. And as far as 4,000 years in the future, now I'm a little different than Alicia on this. I do feel like, you know, black folks will be there. Whatever culture we are at that point will be there. But I think that culture evolves and changes. And even now, like you say, you know, there are a lot of people, several people in this room that if they're in South America, Brazil, they would be calling themselves white as opposed to black. You know, so even around the world, the whole definition of what's a black culture varies. So,
Alan, I'm not white.
Okay, so this is a good stopping point, I think. I think what we have seen here today is that black sci-fi is not a monolith. There are a lot of different ideas and a little bit of something for everybody, and we have a lot of different ideas about what it should. There's as much diversity in black sci-fi as you find anywhere else. I think that's kind of what we walk away with from this with. I want to go ahead and give the authors a chance to maybe plug a website, plug any other activities they're doing at Dragoncon.
I will
start with Alicia.
All right. My husband has my bookmarks out there. He'll pass some of those out for you guys if you want to get it. Where's that young lady that was over there that asked that awesome question about black women? I want you to take one of these books before you leave.
Well, you're not getting a free book from me. Brother got to make some money. So, if you're interested in what I write, you can visit my site, mvmediaatl.com. Basically, I have 5 books out right now. We're working on a couple of anthologies. One which is called Steampunk, which is actually steampunk from a black perspective. Yeah. We'll actually be introducing that at Dragoncon next year in February. And we're also working on a follow-up to our Griot's Sword and Soul anthology called Griot's Sisters of the Spear, where every main character in the story will be a black female. So we've got a lot of things going on right now. We've got a video we're working on. So, visit our site. Our books are available on Amazon and Barnes & Nobles. My lovely wife there has some of my business cards if you guys want to get a copy. And
can you repeat the website?
It's www.mvmediaatl.com.
Awesome. Thank you.
It looks kind of jacked up right now because I'm in the process of changing it, but it'll be all right after a while.
Hi. My website is wendyravenmcnair.com. And earlier I blamed my husband for my lateness. So I just want to also mention that today is my anniversary. Oh. Thank you for that. 26 years married. Yeah, he did. He was the reason I was here late, but on the car over, he gave me these earrings. Nice.
think I'm gonna cry.
And I actually had forgotten. I was like, oh my God, did I really forget the anniversary? But he's a wonderful, wonderful husband. Yes, he may be late, but he's wonderful.
So y'all tell him she said so.
Really. And my books, Asleep, book 1 of the trilogy, and Awake, book 2 is out and available on Amazon, and I'm currently working on Ascend, and I have cards to pass out as well.
Okay. Yes. Before I talk about my book, I just want to say one thing. I think too, just to as far as the lady was talking about how things have expanded, this room would not have existed 20 years ago. I think if we use social media and just leverage it and go out and just share the word about independent writers, and there's a State of Black Science Fiction group on Facebook. If you guys can check that out and join that. And just if we just start to build on what we have and just take this thing forward, I think that would be the most awesome thing. Not just for us, but just, I feel like, all these stories need to be told, and the best story wins. My book is To Wrestle with Darkness. I actually have a prequel to this coming out first quarter next year. I will be more than happy to give this book away to whoever wants it. I'm going to just leave it here and not, I'm going to let fate decide. Fate is too heavy.
Y'all making me look bad here.
I am Ellen Davis. My website is www.shiftersnovelseries.com. It's really long. You can find me at Shifters Novels on Twitter. I actually have a couple more panels here at Dragoncon tomorrow. We're doing race in science fiction right here in this very room tomorrow at 4, I believe. And then tomorrow night, we're talking about Native Americans and Native American mythologies in this very room. This is where all the race panels are. And that's our 10:30.
So this is the only place we can do it.
I didn't say it. But, and I'm also actually going to be signing copies of Interlopers and Posers tomorrow over in the Marriott at 5:30. So if you're interested, I have some swag that I'll bring there. So if you're interested, come by, check me out, say hello. That's in the Marriott in rooms 301 through 304 at 5:30 tomorrow. But all of this, I guess, is on your apps or in your schedule. Or
next year we'll be on the upper level, huh?
And my website is.
Yeah, can we get out the dungeon?
And my website is wrestlewithdarkness.com.
You're a writer.
How many other published authors are in the room?
Oh, how many other published
Any other published authors in the room?
There we go, we got one.
Yeah. I'm one of them also.
Oh, good.
Yeah, no secret. So we do our thing.
Thank you guys.